parents forced me to give up my career to run the family business, and years later I discovered it had only been to benefit my brother. From a young age, I had dreams that stretched far beyond the boundaries of my family's expectations. While my parents saw a safe and predictable path in the family business, I envisioned a life filled with possibilities, where I could carve my own path, explore my talents, and pursue a career that excited me. I had ambitions that went beyond spreadsheets, ledgers, and endless hours of administrative work that my parents insisted were the cornerstone of responsibility and success. Despite my passion for my chosen field, my parents always viewed my interests as mere distractions, fleeting whims that could never bring stability or respect. They spoke often of loyalty, of sacrifice, of the importance of keeping the family legacy intact, and I was repeatedly reminded that my role was not to chase dreams, but to secure the future of the business that had been handed down through generations. It wasn't just a suggestion, it was an expectation, one that left little room for negotiation. I tried, in my own way, to balance both worlds. I enrolled in courses, participated in internships, and pushed myself to excel in my chosen career while still fulfilling the responsibilities my parents assigned me. But no matter how much I achieved, it was never enough. My accomplishments were met with polite nods, never real encouragement, because in their eyes, my real duty lay elsewhere. Every promotion, every award, every recognition I earned felt hollow, because it was never celebrated as a victory for me, but as a minor distraction from the work I should have been doing. The turning point came when I was offered an opportunity that could have changed my life. A position in a prestigious company, one that promised growth, creativity, and the chance to truly develop my potential. It was everything I had worked for, everything I had dreamed of. But when I shared the news with my parents, their reaction was a mix of disappointment and veiled anger. They told me, in no uncertain terms, that I had a duty to the family business, that leaving would be selfish, that I could not abandon my responsibilities for personal ambition. They framed it as a moral obligation, as though my dreams were trivial compared to the weight of our family legacy. I was torn. Part of me wanted to fight, to insist on my right to live my life according to my choices. But the other part, the part that had been molded by years of subtle pressure, quiet manipulation, and constant reminders of duty, hesitated. I feared the consequences of defiance, the cold silence at the dinner table, the disapproval in my mother's eyes, the subtle but relentless guilt that my father could impose. I had been trained to believe that the family's needs always came first, and that my own desires were secondary, almost irrelevant. In the end, I gave in. I told them I would stay, that I would dedicate myself entirely to the family business, suppressing the fire of ambition that had defined my identity. My parents were pleased, congratulating themselves on what they called my maturity and sense of responsibility. I felt a hollow triumph, as if I had succeeded only in losing myself. Over the years, I threw myself into the work, learning every aspect of the business, keeping the books, managing employees, and ensuring that the operations ran smoothly. I became efficient, reliable, and indispensable, but also invisible, a silent worker whose dreams had been buried under the weight of obligation. Meanwhile, my brother flourished. Unlike me, he seemed untouched by our parents' manipulations, able to pursue his interests freely, to explore opportunities without ever facing the same pressure I had endured. He became the visible star of the family enterprise, receiving praise, attention, and recognition at every turn. The contrast was stark, and though I tried to dismiss it, a quiet resentment began to grow, slowly, beneath the surface. It was not that I wanted him to fail, it was that I had been forced to sacrifice my life for a business that now served his ambitions more than anyone else's. There were moments when I considered leaving, when the memory of my forsaken career called to me in the quiet of the night, urging me to reclaim the path I had abandoned. But each time, the weight of parental expectations, of guilt and duty, held me back. I stayed, year after year, building a life of stability for the family, while my own dreams languished in the shadows. The more I tried to justify it, the clearer it became that my sacrifice was never truly appreciated. It was assumed, expected, demanded. And so, the years passed. I became proficient in the family business, respected by employees and clients alike, but internally, a sense of emptiness grew. I watched my brother succeed, thrive, and receive accolades that I had silently earned, wondering how my life might have been different had I chosen myself instead of succumbing to the relentless pressure of duty. In those quiet moments of reflection, I realized that the tragedy of my situation was not simply the loss of a career, but the years of my life spent in service of a system that had never truly valued me as an individual. As the years wore on, the routine of the family business became both a comfort and a cage. Each day was filled with schedules, client meetings, inventory checks, and the endless minutiae of operations that my parents deemed essential. I had become efficient beyond measure, a pillar of reliability, someone they could always depend on. Yet the efficiency came at a cost. The life I had once envisioned, the life I had dreamed of, had been relegated to distant memories, whispers of what could have been. Every promotion, every milestone in my brother's career served as a reminder that my sacrifices were not celebrated but silently exploited. I began to notice patterns in the way my parents operated, subtle manipulations that had gone unnoticed in my youth. Praise was distributed selectively, with an almost surgical precision, designed to elevate my brother while keeping me in a state of perpetual obligation. When I tried to voice my opinions or suggest innovations, they were met with polite nods that disguised thinly veiled dismissal. My ideas were considered, not for their merit, but for how they might support their preferred child. It became clear, though slowly, that the system had never been about fairness, growth, or mutual respect. It had always been about control. There were family gatherings, too, events meant to celebrate accomplishments, yet they always seemed to highlight my brother's successes while minimizing mine. Even my parents' pride was conditional, a tool wielded to maintain order and hierarchy within the family. I learned to smile, to clap, to nod at achievements that were, in reality, echoes of my own labor. And while I maintained a facade of contentment, internally a quiet storm brewed, a mixture of resentment, frustration, and regret that I could never fully express. During these years, I made attempts, small, cautious attempts to reclaim fragments of my personal identity. I took online courses in my field, attended seminars whenever possible, and experimented with freelance projects in the evenings. Each attempt reminded me of the life I had surrendered, the talent I had buried beneath layers of expectation. Yet even these efforts were met with guilt. My parents would ask why I spent so much time on distractions, why I risked diverting energy from the family business, why I dared to dream beyond the walls they had built around me. I tried to rationalize, to convince myself that my sacrifices were noble, that duty outweighed personal fulfillment, that perhaps someday the universe would reward my loyalty. But each day brought another subtle sting, another instance of realization that the sacrifices had never been appreciated for their own sake. They were strategic, deliberate, designed to benefit my brother's position, his future, his comfort. I had been, unwittingly, a foundation for someone else's success while my own aspirations withered in silence. It was during a particularly grueling quarter that the weight of my situation became undeniable. My parents had entrusted me with negotiating a major contract that required months of meticulous preparation. I worked tirelessly, managing every detail, anticipating every possible complication. The contract was secured, a significant achievement that strengthened the company's position considerably. Yet the accolades were almost immediately redirected to my brother, who had contributed only peripherally, serving as the public face for the announcement. My role, crucial and exhaustive, went unrecognized. The sting was sharp, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of defiance rise within me, a quiet insistence that perhaps it was time to confront the truth of my circumstances. I began to observe my brother more closely, analyzing how he navigated the world with relative ease while I had been burdened with years of silent labor. His charm, his confidence, the way our parents lavished attention on him, it all contrasted painfully with the invisible existence I had led. And yet, there was no hatred in me, only a deep, simmering realization that I had been manipulated. The patterns were undeniable, a web of favoritism so precise it was almost mechanical, leaving no doubt that my parents had orchestrated the sacrifices I made not out of love, but out of convenience, out of a calculated effort to maintain their preferred hierarchy. Even my personal relationships suffered. Romantic connections were fleeting, often strained by the demands of the business and the ever-present shadow of parental expectation. Friends suggested I assert myself, to break free, to prioritize my happiness, but their words felt distant and abstract, as though they existed in a world I no longer had access to. I had been conditioned to subordinate my desires, to accept deferment as normal, to equate self-denial with virtue. The years had taught me to smile at others' successes while quietly burying my own, and the impact was cumulative, an internal erosion of confidence and self-worth. Yet despite everything, a quiet resilience remained. I had learned, through hardship and labor, a discipline that was unmatched. I could manage crises, negotiate with precision, and maintain a composure under pressure that few could rival. It was a skill honed not by choice, but by necessity. And though it was bittersweet, I realized that these very skills gleaned from sacrifice might one day allow me to reclaim the life that had been taken from me, to assert control over my destiny in ways my parents could not anticipate. The recognition of this potential sparked a subtle shift within me. While I continued to fulfill my obligations, I began to plan quietly, to explore options and avenues that would allow me to step outside the framework imposed on me. It was not rebellion, not yet, but a careful, deliberate preparation, a promise to myself that the life I had postponed might one day be reclaimed. And as I watched my brother continue to bask in the privileges I had facilitated, I felt no joy, no pride, only a quiet determination, growing stronger with each passing day, to reclaim the opportunities that had been denied to me, to assert my existence beyond the confines of parental control, and to finally live a life that was mine and mine alone. The years that followed became a delicate balancing act, a tightrope walk between duty and suppressed desire. I immersed myself further into the family business, understanding that visibility alone would not protect me from their manipulations. Every strategy one proposed, every client I nurtured, every decision I made carried weight, but it also reminded me of the invisible shackles around my ambitions. My parents' expectations had become a script I had memorized, a series of movements designed to maintain harmony while keeping my personal dreams confined to private corners of my mind. I began documenting the details, initially as a mental exercise. I cataloged contracts, recorded the contributions I had made that went unrecognized, and meticulously noted instances where credit had been diverted to my brother. What started as a private habit quickly evolved into a clearer understanding of the pattern that had defined my life. Each entry, each recollection, revealed the deliberate orchestration behind my sacrifices. The realization was heavy, but it also carried a strange clarity. I had been playing a role not out of mutual family respect, but because I had been expected to. The emotional weight of this recognition was profound. Resentment was no longer a vague, simmering feeling but a defined, almost palpable presence in my chest. The internal conflict between familial loyalty and personal ambition intensified. It was as though a dam had cracked, allowing years of suppressed frustration to seep through every interaction. Even casual comments from my parents, once absorbed without notice, now struck with precision, reminders of the invisible ledger of debts I had accumulated. Despite this, I continued to perform. Each day required careful navigation. I could not risk overt confrontation. My brother, blissfully unaware or perhaps willfully ignorant of the sacrifices I had made, continued to thrive, bolstered by our parents' selective guidance and encouragement. He exuded confidence, a freedom I had never experienced. Watching him maneuver through life with ease was a bittersweet pain, a constant reminder that my energy and talents had been redirected to prop up someone else's trajectory. Yet, amidst this growing awareness, I began to explore avenues for personal reclamation. Late nights were dedicated to skill development in areas I had once dreamed of pursuing. Weekend hours were quietly devoted to projects that allowed me to reconnect with passions I had buried. Each small victory, each incremental step, was a rebellion in miniature, a reclamation of agency that had been denied for so long. These pursuits, though modest, kindled a sense of autonomy, a faint but persistent flame that refused to be extinguished by years of compliance. Financial independence became a focal point. I meticulously saved, invested in ventures unrelated to the family business, and sought counsel from trusted advisors outside the orbit of my parents' influence. The process was slow and deliberate, designed to minimize risk while maximizing the potential for eventual liberation. Every decision was calculated, not merely for profit but as a means to build leverage, a foothold from which I could one day assert full control over my life and choices. Simultaneously, I began to consider the emotional consequences of prolonged compliance. Friendships had suffered, romantic relationships had faltered, and my personal growth had been stunted. I reflected on the countless opportunities missed, the experiences denied, and the silent toll taken on my sense of self. These contemplations were sobering, yet they also served as a catalyst, motivating me to plan for a future that was no longer dictated by parental expectations or the preferential treatment of my brother. The complexity of family dynamics weighed heavily. While I understood their manipulations, I could not entirely detach from the love I felt toward my parents. Their actions, though calculated and often unfair, were intertwined with years of care, guidance, and protection. Reconciling these conflicting emotions became a delicate mental exercise, the need to assert personal autonomy without completely severing familial bonds. It was a balancing act that demanded patience, strategy, and emotional fortitude. Professional strategy intertwined with personal ambition. I cultivated relationships beyond the family's immediate sphere, sought mentors who valued merit over lineage, and positioned myself as a capable, independent force in my industry. Each connection represented a potential bridge to a life outside the suffocating confines of the family business. Every skill I acquired, every recommendation I earned, became a tool to dismantle the invisible cage constructed over decades. Gradually, a plan began to take shape. It was neither impulsive nor reckless, but deliberate, composed of incremental steps that ensured stability while eroding dependency on parental approval. I envisioned a future where my contributions would be recognized, my achievements celebrated on their own merit, and my life directed by personal choice rather than imposed obligation. The plan became a compass, guiding my decisions and providing a sense of purpose beyond the unyielding routine that had dominated my life. And yet, even as I strategized and built independence, I remained keenly aware of the fragility of the situation. One misstep could unravel years of preparation, and my parents' influence remained a powerful, pervasive force. Navigating this intricate web required not only skill and discipline but also emotional resilience. The awareness that my brother had unknowingly or perhaps knowingly benefited from my sacrifices added a layer of complexity, a quiet determination to reclaim what had been denied while avoiding unnecessary conflict. Through all of this, a subtle transformation occurred. No longer defined solely by obligation, I began to see myself as an agent of my own destiny. The years of sacrifice had, ironically, equipped me with the discipline, insight, and resilience necessary to challenge the structures that had constrained me. The recognition of manipulation, combined with newfound autonomy, cultivated a sense of empowerment, a belief that despite decades of subjugation, my life could still reflect my desires, my ambitions, and my choices. It was not revenge I sought, nor a vindictive assertion of self, but the quiet reclamation of a life that had been postponed, reshaped, and redirected without consent. Each step forward reinforced the truth I could build a life defined by merit, effort, and personal fulfillment, untethered from the restrictive hierarchy that had dominated my early adulthood. And while the path was uncertain and fraught with challenges, the foundation I had laid, built from years of sacrifice, observation, and careful strategy, was strong enough to carry me forward toward a future that, for the first time, belonged entirely to me. The emergence of independence brought both exhilaration and a profound sense of tension. For years, my life had been meticulously scripted, every step dictated by parental expectation, every achievement filtered through the lens of my brother's apparent superiority. Now, with a measure of autonomy taking root, I was forced to confront the emotional and practical consequences of decades-long compliance. The realization that I had forfeited not only opportunities but also a portion of my identity was both humbling and infuriating. This awareness became the engine driving a meticulous, almost obsessive focus on reclaiming agency. Daily life took on a dual nature. Outwardly, I maintained the appearance of unwavering commitment to the family business, ensuring that no suspicion arose regarding my quiet withdrawal into independent endeavors. Inwardly, I cultivated knowledge, skills, and networks that existed entirely beyond their reach. Each morning was a study in discipline, balancing obligations with clandestine pursuits of personal growth. The rhythm of these days forged a new resilience, a mental fortitude honed in the crucible of both duty and subtle defiance. Financial strategy became paramount. While I had always managed funds for the family enterprise, I now redirected resources carefully, cultivating investments that were insulated from parental oversight. These financial maneuvers were deliberate and cautious, calculated to provide a foundation for eventual independence without triggering conflict. Each decision, while seemingly minor to observers, represented a step toward self-sufficiency, a reclaiming of control over a life that had long been subordinated to familial hierarchy. Emotionally, the process was far more complex. Feelings of resentment and betrayal, once abstract and simmering beneath the surface, became tangible forces shaping daily thought. I struggled with the tension between loyalty and self-interest, torn between the love I felt for my parents and the recognition that their choices had consistently prioritized my brother at my expense. It was a subtle, pervasive form of psychological negotiation, a balancing act that required constant self-awareness and careful calibration of reactions. The contrast between my brother's freedom and my own constrained existence became increasingly pronounced. He moved through life with apparent ease, accumulating accolades and privileges that were denied to me, not due to lack of ability but because of the structural favoritism embedded within our family. Observing him, I experienced a mix of envy, frustration, and determination, emotions that, while uncomfortable, were indispensable fuel for the strategic planning that defined this stage of my life. Concurrently, I nurtured personal relationships that had suffered under the weight of family obligations. Friendships that had withered due to my absence were slowly revived, while new alliances were forged in spaces free from the judgment and control of my parents. These interactions served as both emotional sustenance and practical networking, reinforcing my growing sense of independence. I discovered that personal fulfillment could coexist with professional diligence, and that a life outside the family business, once unimaginable, was gradually taking shape. The subtle art of negotiation within the family dynamic became increasingly apparent. Every suggestion, every decision within the business sphere was carefully evaluated, ensuring that I could advance both the company and my own long-term goals without drawing undue attention. This strategic navigation required constant vigilance, as any misstep could provoke intervention or scrutiny. Yet, this very complexity also provided lessons in patience, foresight, and adaptability, skills that would ultimately become indispensable in reclaiming autonomy. Introspection played a crucial role during this period. I confronted not only the decisions made by my parents but also my own complicity in maintaining the status quo. Recognizing patterns of self-sacrifice and the internalization of guilt was painful, but it also illuminated the path forward. I began to understand that reclaiming control would necessitate both external action and internal recalibration, a simultaneous reshaping of circumstance and self-perception. Parallel to these developments, I observed the family business itself with new clarity. Patterns of favoritism, operational weaknesses, and unrecognized opportunities became evident. Where I had once focused solely on executing tasks, I now began to analyze structure and strategy from an independent vantage point. This analytical approach provided insight into the broader system, revealing how control, influence, and opportunity had been distributed and, crucially, how I could navigate toward a position of genuine authority. The accumulation of knowledge, both practical and psychological, empowered a growing confidence. Whereas previous decades had been defined by compliance and deferral, the present offered a canvas for deliberate, informed action. Each calculated investment, each strategic relationship, and each personal achievement became part of a larger mosaic, a design for liberation carefully assembled over years of preparation. It was a subtle, almost invisible revolution, one in which patience, observation, and measured action coalesced into tangible progress. As the contours of independence solidified, the emotional landscape remained intricate. Moments of doubt and self-recrimination were frequent companions, particularly when observing my brother's unchallenged ascendancy. Yet, these moments were tempered by the knowledge that my path, though slower and less visible, was deliberate, resilient, and ultimately self-directed. The contrast between outward appearances and inner reality became a recurring motif, highlighting the tension between perception and autonomy. In parallel, I began envisioning the ultimate goal, not merely a symbolic reclamation of agency, but a tangible restructuring of my life that prioritized personal fulfillment, professional recognition, and emotional freedom. The groundwork laid in these years' carefully documented efforts, clandestine investments, cultivated skills, and reinforced relationships represented a foundation from which genuine independence could be asserted. It was no longer a matter of hypothetical ambition but a concrete, actionable plan, each step building upon the last toward a life truly my own. And so, with patience, strategy, and a growing sense of resolve, I moved forward. Each day, each decision, and each investment reinforced the emerging reality that my life, once governed by parental preference and fraternal favoritism, could now be reclaimed. The road was neither smooth nor predictable, but it was mine. For the first time in decades, the trajectory of my life was guided not by obligation or expectation, but by intention, capability, and the quiet, determined assertion of selfhood. Years of careful planning, silent perseverance, and emotional endurance finally culminated in a life that felt authentically mine. I stepped away from the family business, not out of rebellion, but with the clarity that my ambitions and my happiness could no longer be subordinated. My parents' favoritism, once a source of pain and frustration, became a lesson in resilience and strategic patience. I watched my brother continue his path, benefiting from privileges I had once been denied, yet it no longer stirred envy, it only reinforced my understanding that success is defined differently for each person. With independence came freedom to make choices unbound by expectation, to pursue passions long suppressed, and to build relationships that were based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I embraced opportunities that once seemed unattainable, traveling, investing in projects I loved, and cultivating a life aligned with my values. The past, the sacrifices, the resentment, the lost years remained, but it no longer dictated my present. Instead, it informed a perspective grounded in self-determination, dignity, and quiet triumph. Ultimately, reclaiming my life was less about competition and more about authenticity. I learned that happiness could not be dictated, that personal fulfillment requires courage and patience, and that the legacy we inherit does not define the legacy we create. In the end, I was free not only from the expectations of my parents, but from the limitations I had once internalized. For the first time, I lived entirely on my own terms, and that realization was worth every sacrifice.